video whenever you need to, and make sure that you make good notes as well that go in your book ready for revision in the future. So let's get started. So a scattergraph is a graph that has lots of different crosses on and points on that help us to show if there's a relationship between two different variables. And by variables, I just mean two different sets of data, two different things that you want to compare and look at. Okay, so they look a little bit like this. I've got three different scattergraphs here. Okay, and the link between the crosses, or kind of the way they sit, is called correlation. Make sure you've got that box down in your book. And there are different types of correlation that you might see from a scattergraph. We've got positive correlation, negative correlation, and no correlation. Okay, so hopefully you can see that on the positive correlation, as the crosses are kind of going up. So as one thing increases, the other one also increases. So both things are increasing at the same kind of time. That would be a positive correlation. So an example of that would be goals scored and games won. So the more goals you score in whatever game you're playing, the more likely you are to win. So for negative correlation, as one of the variables increases, the other one goes down. So a really obvious one for this is age of car and value. So the older the car, so the age is increasing, you're getting older, the value is decreasing. So old cars are generally worth less than brand new cars. And then you've got no correlation, which to be honest doesn't really come up that much in exams, but it's just useful to know that sometimes the two things aren't linked at all. And that means there's no pattern and nothing we can say about that. Please make sure you've got all of this page written down in your book with the pictures of the scattergraphs so that you've got your notes about correlation. So, as well as knowing the types of correlation, you also are expected to know if a correlation is strong or weak, because they might ask you that when you have to describe a correlation. So I've got three positive correlations here, they're all going up. But which one of these do you reckon is the strongest positive correlation? Now hopefully you've figured that out yourself, but if not, it's showing you that the one is the strongest correlation because the crosses are closer together, and if you were to draw a line of best fit on there, it would be a lot easier to draw it on. On scattergraph number 3, we have a random cross just on the outside of all of the other ones, and it doesn't really seem to fit. And this has a special name, and it's called an outlier. Okay, most of the time scattergraphs we tend to ignore that piece of data because the rest of the data sits all together in a more different place. So it's just useful to know just in case they ask you that. So now we're going to move on to how to plot a scattergraph. So this is the kind of question you might see in an exam. So it says question, the table below shows test scores for a maths test and science test. Draw a scattergraph, what type of correlation does it show, and draw on a line of best fit. So we've got three things to do with this table. So we're going to draw the scattergraph first. Now you need to make sure you use your crosses in your book to make sure it's nice and neat, and make sure you use a ruler to draw your lines, and if you can, do a little mark on each of the squares to make sure your work is super neat and you get the scale right. So what I suggest you do when you start your scattergraph is whatever's on the top of the table, so in this case maths, we put that as the bottom axis. Okay, so maths goes on the bottom, which means science scores go at the side. Now look at your numbers in the table. You should be able to see that maths scores go from 1 to 10, and then from science also goes from 1 to 10. So that would be a good place to start on your scales. And if you notice, all my numbers are right on the lines of my squares. Now I've got my axes ready, it's nice and neat, everything's neatly spaced. Now I need to plot them. So each of these columns are a coordinate to plot. So the first person has a maths score of 4 and a science score of 2. So that will go 4 across to maths, 2 up to science, we plot it. The next one is a score of 3 in maths and a score of 4 in science. So we plot it there. The next one is 6, 7, then 9, 10, 8, 9, 1 and then 2, 10 and then 9, 7 and 7, and 5 and 3. So I've now plotted all my points, and I have done the question for part A, draw a scattergraph. A question I get asked a lot actually is, should I join up the crosses? No. Frequency polygons that we did the other day, yes, you do have to join up the crosses. But a scattergraph, the crosses should be scattered, which means they're not joined up. So never ever join up your coordinates on a scattergraph. So what type of correlation does it show? So you can probably see that all the points, because they're heading up, we probably say that that's a positive correlation. And I've put weak here because actually the crosses are still quite spaced out, aren't they? But if you put positive, you would still get a mark. But it's actually an example of a weak positive correlation. And C, this is really important, draw on a line of best fit. Now the line of best fit shows the general pattern, the general correlation of the scattergraph, okay? And it needs to fit in between most of the crosses on your scattergraph, okay? So my line of best fit looks like this. Okay, I've drawn it through most of the crosses. I haven't gone through any of them, and that's okay. And I've just kind of drawn it between them to show the general pattern that is positive correlation. Now, even if you are doing a question and it doesn't tell you to draw a line of best fit on, it's really good to get in the habit of drawing them on because you will need it later on in a question. So make sure you do that. So this is your task that I'd like to do. So I'm just going to explain it and then you can pause the video and have a go yourself. So I've got 4 questions here for you, and for each kind of boxed question, I'd like you to plot a scattergraph, draw on a line of best fit, and say what type of correlation your crosses on your scattergraph is showing. So it will take quite a bit of time, but I want you to really spend some time drawing those scattergraphs because you're going to be using them later on as well. So pause the video and then move on when you're ready. So these are the answers. So question 1, I've got my scattergraph drawn with my axes. I've plotted all of my points and I'm going to draw my line of best fit on. And I'm going to say, because it's going down, I'm going to say that has a negative correlation. And that makes sense, doesn't it? It makes sense because you've got more sunshine, but the rainfall is going down when there's more sun, which makes more sense. For question 2, we've got my crosses here, and my line of best fit is going to go like that. And because it's going up, I can see that there's a positive correlation. So this is telling me that as the temperature goes up, the number of ice creams sold goes up, which you'd expect. Hotter it is, the more likely you are to go and buy an ice cream. Question 3 and 4 are here. So number of customers and profits. So I've plotted all my points. I've got lots in the middle. Again, draw my line best fit. It's still going up, so that would be a positive correlation. And for question 4, again, I've got my crosses. I've got my line of best fit there. It's showing a positive correlation. Not a very strong one, I must say, so I put weak positive here. But actually, some of you might be like, hang on, miss, haven't you missed out another point? Haven't you missed out this one? And yes, I have. And the reason why I've missed out that one is because that's an outlier. And if I was to draw £1,200 on my bottom axes, it would go on for ages and it would just mess up my whole diagram. So I decided to leave that off because the rest of it shows a weak positive correlation. But if you did it, that's absolutely fine. Okay, now we're moving on to reading information from scattergraphs. So this time the scattergraph's all complete. My line of best fit is on there. I now need to answer some questions about it. So when it says describe the relationship between maths and science scores, it means it wants you to write a sentence just telling me what's happening. Okay, so something like this. If someone's science test score is high, then their maths score tends to be high. Or something like, as the maths scores increase, science scores also appear to increase, which is generally what's happening, isn't it? The higher your maths score, the higher your science score. But I just want to highlight what I put in the box at the top. Scattergraphs only show a pattern. It doesn't mean that this will always happen. So it does not mean that if you get a 9 in maths, you're going to get a 9 in science. You might be really good at maths and not so great at science. So you just need to remember that these are just ideas of what might happen and the patterns that this person has seen based on the data that they've got. So part B, I said we needed to make sure we always draw a line of best fit on. This is why, so that we can answer questions like this. So the question says, Luke missed his maths test but got a 5 in his science test. Estimate what he may have achieved in maths. So this is where we need to use the line. So many of my students in the past don't use the line. And you need to get the second mark. This will be worth 2 marks, this question. So draw your line of best fit on if it hasn't already been drawn, and then we're going to use it. So he has got a 5 in his science test. So what I've done is I've read across from 5 from science, you can see the arrow, and then I've gone down to 5 on maths. So I would guess and estimate that if he got a 5 in science, using my line, he's got a 5 in maths. Now, if you just wrote 5 without using your line of best fit, you probably only get 1 mark instead of 2. So make sure you always use the line that's drawn for you or the one that you've drawn. So I'd like you to have a go at this task now. So this is using your previous 4 scatter graphs that you've already drawn and should already have down in front of you. So I'd like you to use your line of best fit, draw on with a ruler to make it really accurate, and answer these questions about the scatter graphs. So pause the video and move on when you're ready. Okay, so these are your answers. So for question 1, this was the scatter graph I used earlier. We've got 5 hours of sunshine. So if I read across, that gives me 9 millilitres of rainfall. And then for part B, we've got 4 millilitres of rainfall, which gives me about 7 hours of sunshine. Question 2, we've got, I think it was 27. We read across, and we've got 33 or 34. So as long as you're within a certain boundary, you'll get the mark. And then part B, so we read across from 30, we read down, and we've got 26 or 27 as your temperature. Question 3 and 4, again, so we're going to read up from 15 and go across. So I would say that's about £74. But again, as long as you're with near-ish to that amount, you get the mark for it. And for B, we're reading across from 100 to our line, going down. So I'd say that was about 22 or 23 customers. And final question. So the first one was asking you to describe what's happening. So something along the lines of, the more a person earns, the more they tend to save. Because that's normally what's happening. You earn more money, you've got more available, so you can save it. And for B, you're going to read up from 100 and read across. So, I mean, the scale's not great on this, but I would say that's about £14,000. And then for C, you've got to say that, it's only an estimate because the line doesn't tell us exactly what is going on. It's just kind of a guess. It's like the generic thing. It doesn't mean it will happen. So as long as you've kind of tried to explain that, then that would be great. So the final thing I'd like to have a go at today to finish off and consolidate your learning is to have a go at this GCSE question, which is worth 2 marks. This was actually on the foundation and the higher tier paper. So let's see how we get on with it. So the scatter graph shows information about the marks a group of students got in a science test and a maths test. Jamie got a mark of 34 in the science test. Using the scatter graph, find an estimate for Jamie's mark in the maths test. So pause the video, have a go, see if you can get those 2 marks. Okay, so the important thing we need to know about this is because it says using the scatter graph, that means they want to see you writing on it. They want to see you actually using it as it's meant to be. So what you need to do first is draw a line of best fit onto that scatter graph. That will get you a mark, drawing a line. So something like that along those lines would be great. And then you've got to use it like we've just been practicing. So Jamie got 34 in the science. Please make sure you read the right label. So science, read from science. So 34, we go up to the line. We're going to read across, and again, make sure you read the correct scale here. Each of these little squares are worth 1 mark. So this gives him 38 marks as an estimate for his maths test. So I hope you found that video helpful. There is another worksheet on scattergraphs that you can have a go at to extend your knowledge and get some more practice in. But that's it for today. See you next time. Bye.